thank you guys once again for coming today, second half of the conference, and I hope you guys have gotten as much out of it as, frankly, as I have. I know we've thrown a lot of information at you, but we constructed this thing for a reason, and the second half is equally as important as the first half, and this is really where I think we're going to be able to provide you guys with some tools when you leave here on how to protect yourselves and your businesses. So with that being said, our next speaker is Assemblyman Kevin Kiley. He's a California State Assemblyman who was elected to represent the 6th Assembly District, which includes Placer, Sacramento, and El Dorado counties. He serves as the Vice Chair of the Privacy and Consumer Protection Committee and as a member of the Education, Higher Education, Judiciary, and Governmental Organization Committees. With that being said, Assemblyman.
Thank you. It is great to be here, and I really appreciate the invitation, Aaron, to come down. I'm Kevin Kiley. I represent a district in the State Assembly that's a little northeast of Sacramento. For anyone who's familiar with the area, some of the cities in my district are Folsom, Roseville, Rockland, Lincoln, El Dorado Hills, Cameron Park, Granite Bay. You should come up and visit sometime. It's a beautiful place. A little hotter than it is here. I will say that in the interest of full disclosure. Sebastian Ridley Thomas, who we heard from earlier, and I are two of the 80 members of the California State Assembly, where we legislate at the state capitol in Sacramento. Of course, Senator Allen is one of 40 members of the state Senate. Right now, we're actually in the middle of our summer recess. It's a month long, and it's sort of the calm before the storm because we come back on August 21st, and then we have 3 weeks for the end of session with just a flurry of hundreds of bills that we're voting on. The legislature likes to procrastinate like everyone else. So that's what we've got coming up, but it's really a pleasure to come down here to LA during the recess because, my home is where I represent, and that's where I grew up. I actually started each of my first two careers in LA. After college, I was a high school teacher at a school sort of near USC, actually. But I lived in Westwood at the time. And I think I gained like 15 pounds going to that ice cream sandwich shop, D.D. Reese. Is that still around? I'd go like twice a day when I got here for several months. I then, after law school, returned and was at a law firm called Ariento in Manila in Century City for a couple years and had the chance to work on general business litigation, actually do a lot of IP as well. And so it's been a little while since I've been back, and it's really great to be here. I will give a couple sort of vague politician-like prefatory comments before getting into a little more in-depth discussion about the state of cybersecurity policy at the Capitol. And one is just relating to small businesses. That's why I'm so appreciative of what Ariento is doing. I mean, we all know that small businesses are really the lifeblood of our economy, and we also know how difficult it is to succeed as a small business. There are inherent challenges just in starting up and being able to flourish, and my opinion is that our state doesn't make it any easier. California is routinely ranked as having the worst business climate in the country, and those challenges are borne, I think, disproportionately by small businesses, where you might not have as much of a margin to absorb some of the costs, or you might not have a big compliance department to help you understand the latest statutes and regulations, or you might not have, a highly paid in-house counsel to help you avoid all of the litigation traps that are out there. And so, as the previous speakers have explained very well, the unique vulnerability of small businesses to cybersecurity is sort of one more thing that makes it challenging to succeed as a small business, and something that I think is very important for us to keep in mind in crafting policy, while at the same time understanding that small businesses are also uniquely vulnerable to whatever regulations might be put in place to protect against cybersecurity concerns. And so striking that balance and accounting for both aspects of that, I think, is going to be very important for us. And I guess the second general point has to do with the issue of trust, which I think underlies cybersecurity concerns both as they relate to the private sector and as they relate to government. Because, as we've come into the digital age, this idea of trust is really at the core of the functioning of commerce and the relationship between citizens and their government. When your net worth is stored on some server, and your private information is constantly being turned over. Without this basic trust that our information is going to be safe and that we're not going to be compromised, it's very difficult for the whole system to work. And as sort of cyber things get more and more integrated into our lives, keeping this trust in place is going to become increasingly important, which is why I think that cybersecurity is one of the most important policy issues facing this state, facing the country right now, and it's why I feel fortunate to have the chance to address those issues as vice chair of the Privacy and Consumer Protection Committee. So the committee was actually created just a couple years ago, and to be perfectly honest, its precise purview is still being defined in a lot of ways. But one area where it has clear responsibility is cybersecurity. And so today I just want to talk about what our committee, the Privacy and Consumer Protection Committee, and our state government more generally are doing to respond to cybersecurity threats. And I'll focus on a couple themes. How do we balance regulations with a flexibility to respond to evolving threats? And how do we promote the development of a workforce that can meet the security challenges of a digital economy? So let's just begin, and this is, I don't need to spend a lot of time on this because our previous speakers have summarized the scale of the problem quite well. Over the next couple of years, the global cost of cybercrime is predicted to increase threefold. And former FBI Director Robert Mueller, has been in the news for other things, I guess, lately, has testified that hacking may soon replace terrorism as the FBI's primary concern. So many small business owners, of course, don't realize that they are disproportionately at risk. A 2016 report from our state's Office of the Attorney General found that 50% of all cyber attacks targeted businesses with fewer than 2,500 employees, with 62% of attacks directed at businesses with less than 250 employees. The average cost of a data breach is over $52,000. And that number partially explains in a statistic that we saw earlier that at least 60% of small businesses that experience a data breach go out of business within 6 months. That's pretty staggering when you think about it. Over 60% are out of business within 6 months as a result. It's an existential issue. So businesses of all sizes need to be proactive in securing their data and promoting vigilance when it comes to sharing sensitive information. So I'll give just a brief overview of California's cybersecurity laws, which our first speaker provided some background on as well. And this is going to be a little bit more of a chronological political perspective on how things have evolved. So for good reason, California does not codify specific requirements for how businesses should protect their data. To do so, I think, would be foolhardy given how quickly the security landscape changes. That being said, state law does hold companies, nonprofits, and state agencies accountable for lax security. So California, as we've heard, was among the first to adopt cybersecurity laws, creating a model that's eventually been spread in one form or another to 47 states. And so at the center of state cybersecurity policy is the Notice of Security Breach Act of 2003. The Breach Act requires that California consumers be notified when their personal information is illegitimately obtained from a database. That includes social security numbers, driver's licenses, bank account numbers, and credit card information. The intent is both to enable victims of a security breach to protect their identities and to use the threat of unwelcome publicity, perhaps, related to the breach to compel companies to invest in adequate data security. Now, since its passage, there have actually been a number of revisions to the Breach Act to expand its scope and its application. In 2004, the legislature passed a bill requiring businesses that keep personal information on California residents to possess a reasonable, generally acceptable level of security. So this is obviously a standard of reasonableness. Again, it can vary based upon the sensitivity of the information. Most consumers, for instance, would expect their credit card information to be protected much more vigilantly than their email password. If the security measures protecting personal information at the time of a breach are not reasonable, then the business must notify its consumers. In 2011, the Breach Act was amended again to require that notifications of a breach be written in plain language and include information about what data might have been stolen, along with a general description of the breach incident itself. In 2013, the law was expanded to pertain to stolen usernames and emails in combination with stolen passwords and security questions. Most recently, just last year, amendments were added to include the theft of encryption keys. Now, many of these amendments appropriately expand the purview of the Breach Act in my view, but as we continue to update and modernize the law, we have to be careful, again, not to overprescribe protocols for data breaches. That's one reason why Governor Schwarzenegger vetoed several proposed additions to the Breach Act during his term as governor, warning that by locking in today's best practices, the bills would assure that the law remains static in the face of future unseen concerns. So the Breach Act will continue to evolve, and we'll continue to see before my committee proposals to update it, but whatever changes are made must be done in a manner, in my view, that guarantees the appropriate level of flexibility for the future. So the second general topic then relates to the public sector. And, businesses certainly have responsibility to provide reasonable protections for their data, but the state has that responsibility as well, to protect the data of its citizens and to ensure that digital infrastructure is safe from disruption. But California, to be perfectly honest, has not always been as proactive as it ought to be. Just 2 years ago, the state auditor came up with a scathing report on the state's cybersecurity systems. And the conclusions were pretty alarming. The auditor found that a third of surveyed state entities did not understand the requirements in the state's internal security standards. 8 reported that they did not anticipate being in compliance until at least 2020. And several state entities, including constitutional offices and those in the judicial branch, turned out not to be subject whatsoever to the state technology department's security standards and oversight. By August of 2015, the governor responded with an executive order, B 3415, which established the California Cybersecurity Integration Center, or CalCSIC. The agency is tasked with the analysis and sharing of cyber threat information. By coordinating between state and federal agencies, CalCSIC also helps to implement cyber vulnerability assessments and is beginning to work to standardize intelligence tools and information streams across state departments. So we've taken steps in the right direction. Now, last year, a bill was proposed to establish CalCSIC into statute, and the legislation passed out of the Privacy Committee. I wasn't there at the time. Don't know if I mentioned when I started. This is my first year in office, was elected last. Don't blame me for anything that's happened before. I was elected last November, and this is actually my first office I've held as an elected official. So I'm a new legislator serving on a relatively new committee dealing with an issue that is not super new, but relatively so and constantly changing. So one of the reasons I was so eager to accept the invitation to be here is to learn myself about how best to confront some of these challenges. And already I've more than gotten my money's worth from our first couple speakers. But in any case, this bill passed the Privacy Committee last year, but it was never enacted into law. It was held in what's called the Appropriations Committee, which for those of you who are familiar with the Capitol Works is where a lot of bills die. But the concern, as is often the case with any measure pertaining to cybersecurity, is that the bill might arrest innovation. It might hamper it, in this case by handcuffing future governors from developing different policies related to cybersecurity. I'll note that I'm not sure how strong that objection was with respect to CalCSIC, because nothing's stopping the governor from using an executive order to restructure the state's cybersecurity apparatus. But with that in mind, a second bill has been introduced this year to codify CalCSIC into state law. Indeed, the bill goes even farther by calling for the development of a statewide cybersecurity strategy and establishing a cyber incident response team. CalCSIC would coordinate with both the California State Threat Assessment System and the U.S. Department of Homeland Security to ensure that the virtual components of our critical infrastructure are protected and that we have protocols in place to respond to emergencies. That bill has passed the Assembly and is now making its way through the Senate. Not exactly sure where it is there, but probably coming to the floor of the Senate pretty soon. So looking ahead, there is still work to be done for sure to secure California's digital infrastructure, which is essential to our state security, economy, and public health. And just to highlight one area of concern, in 2015, a report conducted by the Department of Homeland Security, it was found that water grids are just as susceptible to attacks by hackers as electric grids. And suffice it to say, water in California is especially precious. And as water utilities become more reliant on digital networks to operate, California's ability to shield these networks from hackers will become central to our security. Luckily, there is something we can learn from the practices of other states. Take Illinois, where there's a bill that was signed into law last year that requires public water utilities to file annual reports surveying vulnerabilities to cyber attacks related to the state's water supply. And New Jersey, another example last year, passed a bill, a water quality and accountability bill, that imposes cyber risk management plans on all water purveyors in the state. Inspections and evaluations are a necessary component to ensure systems are secure and adaptable to evolving threats, in my view. And Cal CSIC can take its cue from some of these best practices in other states when improving the security of our own critical infrastructure. Finally, a component that I think is vital to our cybersecurity future is our workforce in this area. It's as much cybersecurity about people as it is about process. And we kind of heard this the other side of the coin from our last speaker, looking at the people who are like the bad guys. But I'm talking about the good guys. The cybersecurity industry is among the fastest growing in California. Cybersecurity job postings increased by 74% between 2007 and 2013, compared with just 33% for all IT jobs. So it's a growth industry, and yet supply is still not meeting demand. Reports show that cybersecurity jobs take 36% longer to fill than all other jobs, and I'd be interested in hearing if that's been the experience of folks here in the LA area. A 2016 survey on the state of cybersecurity found that 33% of respondents reported less than a quarter of their cybersecurity applicants are qualified upon hire. 60% of respondents reported less than half of their applicants are qualified. And again, I'd be very interested in whether that squares with the experiences of folks here. But the good news is that the legislature has begun to wake up to the problem. AB 276 is a bill that passed the Assembly earlier this year. It would request institutions of higher education in California to evaluate participation in and graduation rates for cybersecurity training programs. This study would be used to determine the extent to which the state is meeting the workforce needs of the cybersecurity industry, which could inform future legislation promoting access and development for effective cybersecurity programs. If we hope to remain at the forefront of the cyber industry, we must also find ways to nurture interest, in my view, in computer science more generally and cybersecurity in particular. So take what Virginia has done. They've found a very innovative approach. They've found success in their Cyber Veterans Initiative, just founded last year. It's a collaboration between private firms and the state government to provide free training to veterans. And I think this is an idea worth pursuing here in California because many veterans leave the military each year, often searching for a new vocation. And by focusing on them during their transition, we can train disciplined workers and bolster the industry with an exceptional talent pool. And the California Cybersecurity Task Force is creating a workforce development plan for California right now, and I think that veterans need to be a major component of it, not only to target a group of highly professional workers, but also because many already have active security clearances. And finally, we can attract more of the state's best and brightest to cybersecurity, I think, by targeting K12 students as well. Many students still are never exposed to computer science and therefore have no opportunity to really gauge their interest in this field. And by making computer science a larger focus of public education, I think more students would choose technology-related fields, and many would go into fields that are useful to the cybersecurity industry. In fact, a recent column in the Wall Street Journal that I thought was interesting proposed allowing students to fulfill their high school language requirement, rather than French or Spanish or what have you, with a computer language. That might be one avenue for integrating more coding into the classroom. So in conclusion, California has been a leader in certain ways in cybersecurity. both in the public and private sector. But we certainly have more work to do, and we definitely cannot be complacent. We must continue to be at the forefront of cybersecurity advancement. Ingenuity and foresight are two of California's greatest assets, and it's my hope that our state will rise to the challenge, will rise to meet those challenges here in the years and decades ahead. And I look forward to having the opportunity to collaborate with folks here in doing so in my time in the legislature. So thanks very much, and if we have any time, we'd be happy to answer a few questions, or would love to hear any comments as well. Yeah.
Regulate people who provide cybersecurity services, like lawyers and doctors and architects have.
So like a separate licensing type of.
That's so important to our economy and the state. Is there any interest in that?
That's it's an interesting thought. I haven't heard anything along those lines, but I do think, as I said, that we need to explore ways to develop that workforce more and to encourage more folks to go into it. And so, ideas like that are definitely worth considering. I was told by Aaron, by the way, that I could open up for any questions about the legislature, too. So even if it's not, cybersecurity related.
Well, to her point, Assemblyman, do you suggest people, contacting your staff, obviously not you, because you don't represent this specific area, but either Assemblyman Ridley Thomas or Senator Ben Allen, do you guys encourage that kind of conversation from your constituents about ideas or general things, that they think could help the state or small business owners?
Yes, absolutely. And, one of my, problems with the way business is done in Sacramento sometimes is that the impact for the folks who will actually be subject to the regulations oftentimes is not adequately considered or even considered at all. And so, you come up with, this is this great new statute or regulation, and we'll throw in a private cause of action so that you can sue when people don't do it. And there isn't a lot of thought put into how does this actually translate to the people on the ground who are trying to run a business, trying to keep their doors open, and are the benefits you're seeking to achieve even going to come to fruition in a way that will in any way justify the cost, the expense, the hurdle to innovation and growth. So to the extent that you can be actively engaged as business owners or, in whatever your specific field is, and if there's legislation that will have an impact on your industry, getting in touch with your representative and, letting them know, look, here's exactly what this is going to mean for me. I know when I hear that sort of thing from folks, it makes a huge impression and very much, and I try to actively seek it out as much as possible as well when I'm making decisions on how to vote on something.
Bob spoke about how the federal government might get their act together at some point and pass their own gas breach law. Is that something as a state legislature, legislator that you want to happen, or you would prefer to be at kind of the state level?
I think it would depend a little bit what the law looked like, but I think that it certainly makes sense that we need to have some uniformity in this area, and that could take the form of the federal government stepping in. It could also take the form of a little more coordination among the states as far as breach laws are concerned. I mean, there are. I'm not sure how advanced, in other areas of law we have model statutes and that sort of thing, and you have task force that look at this. And so I think that this is perhaps an area where we could do more of that, trying to create a little more alignment among states to avoid these sort of irregularities. All right, thank you very much.